I'm recording this video with permission from Scholastic. So welcome back, guys. Today we're going to be reading chapters 6 and 7 of the Tale of Despereaux. If you want to refresh your memory from last chapter, we learned that Despereaux is a very unusual mouse and he does not act according to the rules of his kind. At the very end, we realize that he has completely shown himself to Princess P, and he was hiding in a hole listening to the music, and it just drew him in, and he ended up sitting at the edge right at the foot of Princess P's feet. And his brother, Furlough, we learned at the very end, the Furlough went off to tell his father, Lester Tilling, the terrible, unbelievable news of what he had just seen. And so I think, personally, I kind of think that Despereaux might get in trouble because he's acting very different than the other mice of his kind and what his family does. So I want you to maybe make a prediction and think about what you think is going to happen to Despereaux. We know there's some kind of adventure that's going to happen with Princess P based on what we read on the back of the cover originally, but we really don't know much more than that. So keep your eyes out and let's see what happens. So chapter 6, This Drum. He simply cannot be my son, Lester said. He clutched his whiskers with his front paws and shook his head from side to side in despair. Of course he is our son, said Antoinette. What do you mean he is not your son? This is a ridiculous statement. Why must you always make these ridiculous statements? You, said Lester, this is your fault. The French blood in him made him crazy. C'est moi, said Antoinette. C'est moi? Why must it always be I who takes the blame? If your son is such a disappointment, it is much your fault as mine. Something must be done, said Lester. He pulled on a whisker so hard it came loose. He waved the whisker over his head and he pointed it at his wife. He will be the end of us all, he shouted, sitting at the foot of a human king. Unbelievable, unthinkable. Oh, so dramatic, said Antoinette. She held out one paw and studied her painted nails. He's a small mouse. How much of harm can he do? If there is one thing I have learned in this world, said Lester, it is that mice must act like mice or else there will bound to be trouble. I will call a special meeting for the Mouse Council. Together we will decide what must be done. Oh, said Antoinette, you and this council of mouse. It is a waste of time in my opinion. Don't you understand? Shouted Lester. He must be punished. He must be brought up before the tribunal. He pushed past her and dug ferociously through a pile of paper scraps until he discovered the thimble with a piece of leather stretched across its open end. Oh, please, said Antoinette. She covered her ears. Not this drum of the Council of the Mouse. Yes, said Lester, the drum. He held up high above his head, first to the north and then to the south, and then to the east and then to the west. He lowered it and turned his back to his wife and closed his eyes and took a deep breath and began to beat the drum slowly. One long beat with his tail, two staccato beats with his paws. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap. The rhythm of the drum was a signal for the members of the Mouse Council. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom. The beating of the drum let him know that an important decision would have to be made, one that affected the safety and well-being of the entire mouse community. Boom, tap, tap, boom, tap, tap, boom. So that's the end of chapter 6. We're going to go on to read chapter 7. But I did ask you to make a prediction about what you think would happen to Despereaux. I don't think we found out that answer in this chapter. We mostly just got the father's perspective. Lester and Antoinette, his parents, are both kind of like, you know, they're not really sure what to do. Lester, his father, kind of wants to punish him, and the mom just kind of is like, oh, woe is me. He's a disappointment. You know, we're not really sure where she stands either. So let's go on to read chapter 7, called A Mouse in Love. And what was our own favorite member of the mouse community doing while the sound of the Mouse Council drum echoed through the walls of the castle? Reader, I must report that Furlough had not seen the worst of it. Despereaux sat with the princess and the king and listened to song after song. At one point, gently, oh so gently, the pea picked up the mouse in her hand. She cupped him in her palm and scratched his oversized ears. You have lovely ears, the pea said to him. They are like small pieces of velvet. Despereaux thought that he might faint with pleasure of someone referring to his ears as small and lovely. He laid his tail against the Pea's wrist to steady himself and felt the princess's pulse, the pounding of her heart, and his own heart immediately took up the rhythm of hers. "Papa," said P when the music was over, "I am going to keep this mouse. We are going to be great friends." The king looked at Despereaux, cupped in his daughter's hands. He narrowed his eyes. "A mouse," he muttered. "A rodent?" "What?" said the P. "Put it down," the king commanded. "No," said the P, who was the person not at all used to being told what to do. "I mean, why should I?" "Because I told you to." "But why?" protested the P. "Because it's a mouse." "I know. I'm the one who told you who's a mouse." "I wasn't thinking," said the king. "Thinking of what?" "Your mother, the queen." "My mother," said the P sadly. "Mice are rodents," said the king. He adjusted his crown. "They are related to rats. You know how we feel about rats. You know that our dark history with rats." P shuddered. "But Papa, he's not a rat. He's a mouse. There's a difference." "Royalty," the king said, "has many responsibilities, and one of them is not becoming involved personally with even the distant relatives of one's enemies. Put him down, P." The princess put Despereaux down. "Good girl," said the king, and he looked at Despereaux. "Scat," he said. Despereaux, however, did not scat. He sat up and stared at the princess. The king stamped his foot. "Scat!" he shouted. "Papa," said the princess, "please don't be mean to him," and she began to weep. Despereaux, seeing her tears, broke the last of the great ancient rules of mice. He spoke to a human. "Please," said Despereaux, "don't cry." He held out a handkerchief to the princess. The P sniffed and leaned down close to him. "Do not speak to her," thundered the king. Despereaux dropped his handkerchief. He backed away from the king. "Rodents do not speak to princesses. We will not have this becoming a topsy-turvy, wrong-headed world. There are rules. Scat! Get lost before my common sense returns and I have killed you." The king stamped his foot again. Despereaux found it alarming to have such a big foot down with so much force and anger so close to his own small head. He ran towards the hole in the wall, but he turned before he entered it. He turned and shouted to the princess, "My name is Despereaux." "Despereaux," she said. "I honor you," shouted Despereaux. "I honor you" was what the knight said the fair maiden in the story that Despereaux read every day in the book in the library. Despereaux had muttered the phrase often to himself, but he had never before this evening had an occasion to use it when speaking to someone else. "Get out of here," shouted the king, stamping his foot harder and then still harder, so it seemed as if the whole castle, the very world, were shaking. "Rodents know nothing of honor." Despereaux ran into the hole, and from there he looked out at the princess. She had picked up his handkerchief, and she was looking at him, right directly into his soul. "Despereaux," she said. He saw his names on her lips. "I honor you," whispered Despereaux. "I honor you." He put his paw over his heart. He bowed so low that his whiskers touched the floor. He was, alas, a mouse, deeply in love. And that's the end of our chapter. So we talked a little bit about the plot of this book and how when we read originally that he was in love with a princess, a human princess, the author even made a comment, "Well, you might think this sounds very ridiculous and crazy," and the author even recognized that it does sound ridiculous and crazy. A mouse being in love with a human, it's a little weird, right? But I think it's very interesting because regardless if Despereaux's a mouse or not, he's somebody who doesn't fit in with his family, isn't doing what everybody thinks he should be doing, and he's kind of forging his own path. And it is interesting to see that maybe Princess P is kind of the same way. She's a human, she's royal, she's a princess, and she has a lot of expectations upon her, but she's not treating Despereaux the same way that her father is treating him. Her father is the big angry guy who's been stamping his foot and telling him to scat, and Princess P is a lot more gentle and kind towards Despereaux. So it is interesting to see kind of those two characters who are very different, but they kind of parallel each other in the sense that they're going down a different path and maybe thinking about things a little differently than those in their lives. So stay tuned to our next video, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye!